It feels like humans have always been obsessed with knowing what's coming next. I mean, think about it. In ancient prophets,
Hmm.
people reading stars, maybe just hoping you had a dream that meant something. That urge to know, to prepare.
Hmm.
It feels really deep seated, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah, it cuts across, well, basically all of history and culture. And what's so interesting now is how that same drive is showing up in like super advanced technology.
Yes, exactly. Which is what we're doing in this deep dive. We're looking at two really different ways people try to see the future.
Mm.
On one hand, you've got traditional psychic precognition, the gut feeling or intuitive knowing, and on the other, the incredible power of AI, predictive analytics.
Right, and we're basing all of this discussion just on the source material provided for this deep dive, looking at how these two approaches, which seem worlds apart, might actually connect.
Yeah, our goal today is really to unpack what this material presents. We want to get a handle on how each is supposed to work, what their limitations are, explore maybe some surprising connections that the sources talk about, highlight the big differences, and get into the really big ethical questions that come up when you talk about predicting the future.
Yeah, think of it as a way for you, the listener, to get up to speed quickly on this really fascinating intersection, how the material sort of hints at this, what it calls an emergent psychic digital continuum.
Okay, so let's start with the more mysterious side.
Yeah.
Psychic precognition. What does the material actually mean by that?
Well, it defines it as getting knowledge about future events, but without using your normal senses or like logical deduction. It's described as a kind of ESP, extrasensory perception, that seems to work outside of our usual idea of time flowing in one direction. And it often comes through as maybe symbolic glimpses or fragments, not always a straightforward picture.
Hmm. And the material points out this isn't just some, modern fringe idea. It has really deep historical roots. You mentioned figures like Nostradamus or the Oracle of Delphi. People consulted them for huge decisions, right? Political stuff, worries about disasters.
Exactly, those big famous examples. But the sources also bring it down to earth, talking about experiences people report more often, like precognitive dreams. Dreaming something happens, could be small, could be major, and then it actually does.
Right, and it specifically mentions Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet.
The idea there was he'd go into a trance and give readings that apparently had accurate medical diagnoses or predicted things about people's lives years ahead.
Wow. And then there are just those sudden feelings people get. Spontaneous premonitions.
Yeah, like a flash of insight or just a strong gut feeling. Often it's described as a warning, something that makes someone change their plans and maybe avoid something bad.
Okay, so beyond stories and anecdotes, does the material mention any scientific attempts to study this? Parapsychology.
It does touch on that. Things like remote viewing studies. Researchers trying to see if people could describe places or objects they couldn't possibly see, sometimes even future targets.
Uh huh.
And this concept of presentiment research, which sounds pretty wild, it tries to measure your body's reaction, like heart rate changes, before you're actually shown something emotional, like a picture.
Like your body knows first.
Kind of. The idea is the body might be reacting slightly ahead of the conscious experience.
Okay. And it also mentions something called DMI, direct mental interaction.
Yeah, but it flags that as controversial. It's this idea that maybe consciousness itself can subtly influence physical systems to anticipate what's coming. Very speculative stuff.
So naturally, people try to come up with theories for how any of this could possibly work.
Right. The material mentions a few proposed models. One is nonlinear time.
Meaning time isn't just a straight line.
Exactly. Maybe it's more fluid or has more dimensions.
Yeah.
So accessing the future isn't like traveling forward, it's more like accessing a, quote, future memory.
Interesting. What else?
Another idea mentioned is Akashic field access. This comes more from esoteric traditions. It's the concept of a universal information field, like a cosmic database, holding all past events and maybe all potential future paths, and maybe certain people can tap into that.
Like tuning into a radio station.
Sort of, yeah. That's the analogy sometimes used.
And then it gets into physics, quantum entanglement.
And retrocausality. But the material is this is highly speculative. It's linking psi phenomena to ideas in quantum physics, suggesting connections across space and time, or even effects happening before their causes in some weird quantum way, letting info leak back from the future. Definitely out there.
Okay, so if we pull all that together, how does the material characterize psychic precognition generally?
Well, typically. Symbolic, so means interpreting. It's qualitative, more about the what and why. not precise numbers. It's intuitive, a non-rational kind of knowing. Importantly, it's presented as non-deterministic. It shows possibilities, probabilities maybe, not a fixed fate. The future can still be changed. Often very personal, relevant to the person having the experience, and often elusive, hard to pin down, happens spontaneously, difficult to replicate on demand.
Right. Got it. So that's the psychic side. Now, let's completely switch gears. AI predictive analytics. How is that defined in contrast?
Fundamentally different. It's all about data, algorithms, computing power. No intuition whatsoever. It's forecasting what might happen by finding patterns in, well, enormous amounts of data.
So the core mechanics are things like machine learning algorithms. Computers learning from data.
Exactly. The material mentions different types, like regression for predicting numbers, think stock prices, and classification for predicting categories like spam or not spam.
And the real power comes from more complex stuff, neural networks.
Yeah, neural networks and deep learning. These models can handle incredibly complex, layered data and find really subtle, non-obvious connections that a human analyst would just never spot.
And this all runs on big data, right? Analyzing just massive data sets.
Huge amounts, from everywhere. Financial markets, weather sensors, social media, satellite pictures, historical texts, you name it.
And what's the AI doing with all that data?
Pattern recognition, essentially. It's looking for repeating sequences, correlations between different things, oddities, anomalies, and it uses those statistical patterns to build models that predict what's likely to happen next.
And the applications are, well, everywhere now, aren't they?
Pretty much. The material lists a ton. Financial markets, obviously predicting stock moves, managing risk, weather and climate forecasting, longer range forecasts, predicting severe weather, modeling climate change impacts. That uses huge atmospheric data sets.
Public health, too.
Definitely. Predicting disease outbreaks, figuring out which groups are most at risk, helping personalize medical treatments based on analyzing patient data and trends.
And things we see every day, like predicting social trends, what we buy, maybe even politics.
Absolutely. Consumer behavior for advertising, trying to predict political outcomes from social media buzz, identifying crime hotspots, and even cybersecurity, predicting where attacks might come from by analyzing network traffic.
Okay, so we've compared the characteristics of AI prediction to the psychic kind. AI is quantitative, right? It deals in numbers, probabilities.
Exactly. Statistical likelihoods, often expressed as, a percentage chance.
And it's probabilistic, like psychic insights sometimes are, but based purely on data.
Purely data-driven. No gut feelings allowed. It's all about the input data and the algorithm.
Which means it's deterministic in a way. Same data, same algorithm, same result.
Precisely. Unlike the often spontaneous nature of psychic events, AI is repeatable and predictable if the inputs are the same.
And it's getting really, really good in certain areas. Sometimes better than humans.
In specific, data-rich domains, absolutely. It can outperform human judgment.
Okay, so here's where the material starts to bring things together in a really interesting way. It talks about this idea of a digital akasha. What's that about?
Right, this is a fascinating concept from the sources. It's comparing the totality of our digitized information, everything online, all the databases, social media, historical records, real-time sensor feeds, comparing all of that to the traditional idea of the Akashic records.
Like a digital memory field of humanity.
Exactly. A vast, interconnected repository reflecting our collective knowledge, activity, and maybe even consciousness captured in data.
And AI has unprecedented access to this digital akasha.
That's the point. AI can process essentially all of this digitized history plus the constant flow of real-time data at speeds we can't even imagine. It gives it this unique viewpoint on the collective now.
Allowing it to see patterns we can't. Like that stock prediction example using weird data sources.
Yeah, it excels at finding those super subtle correlations across vast, seemingly unrelated data sets. Like connecting sentiment on some obscure online forum with satellite images of factory output to predict a commodity price. Things no human could realistically track and connect.
So the material frames AI as a kind of pattern recognition oracle.
It's not mystically seeing the future. It's calculating probabilities based on the incredibly complex statistical patterns it finds in this digital akasha. Its predictions are like the most probable outcomes arising from the current state and a momentum of the dance of data, as the source puts it.
But crucially, these AI predictions aren't just passive observations, are they? They feed back into the system.
That's a critical point the material makes. They create feedback loops. They influence human behavior.
How so?
Well, if an AI predicts a market crash, Traders might panic and sell, actually helping cause the crash. If an AI recommends products, it shapes what we buy. If AI forecasts shape the news, it influences opinions and actions.
So the AI isn't just a spectator. Its predictions become part of the reality they're trying to predict.
Yes, exactly. Its outputs actively shape the future it's forecasting.
Okay, this leads us to some really interesting potential points of convergence discussed in the material. Despite being so different, consciousness versus computation, could they somehow be tapping into the same underlying reality?
That's the hypothesis floated. Maybe there's some kind of underlying informational field. The source mentions terms like morphogenetic field, collective unconscious, probability space that holds the potentials for the future. Psychics might access this field directly through consciousness, maybe intuitively, while AI accesses a reflection of it, the data shadow, if you will, through processing the digital akasha, which is itself a product of collective activity and consciousness.
So you get this idea of data driven precognition, AI kind of mimicking intuition.
In a way, yeah, AI isn't conscious, but by synthesizing these vast data sets, it can sometimes infer emerging trends or possibilities before they're obvious. It's like computational foresight. It sees the seeds of the future in the aggregated nows in a way that mirrors how intuition might grasp a nascent pattern.
And the material even suggests AI could, maybe, help human intuition.
Potentially. By mapping out complex probabilities and correlations derived from data, AI could maybe provide a structure, like a scaffold. It might help psychics or intuitives focus their attention, maybe gain clearer insights, or perhaps see alternative possibilities that the purely data driven AI might overlook.
And a key similarity seems to be that both systems usually present probabilities, not a fixed future.
Right. They both often describe a probability landscape, a range of possible outcomes with different likelihoods, which underscores the idea that the future isn't set in stone. It's dynamic, fluid, influenced by choices we make now. Both approaches, in theory, allow for informed choices rather than just passively waiting.
But of course, the material also stresses the huge differences, the points of divergence.
Absolutely crucial differences. The biggest one is the source of insight.
Consciousness versus calculation.
Exactly. Psychic insight is described as subjective, non rational, felt, qualitative. AI is algorithmic, computational, objective, based on data, mathematical. And importantly, it has zero subjective experience. It doesn't feel the future.
There's also a difference in how they handle the unexpected.
Yeah.
Adaptability.
Yeah, flexibility versus rigidity. Psychic insight, being tied to consciousness, might potentially grasp truly novel, unprecedented events, black swans things, completely outside past experience. AI, on the other hand, fundamentally learns from past data. It struggles massively with true novelty, situations where there's no historical data to learn from.
Yeah, that leads to different ethical implications, especially around free will.
The material contrasts what it calls ethical determinism with open endedness. Highly accurate AI predictions can create this psychological weight, a feeling of inevitability. This raises concerns about impacting our sense of agency, maybe even creating self fulfilling prophecies just because the AI said so.
Whereas psychic insights are often framed more like warnings or possibilities.
Often, yeah. More mutable, potentially leaving more room for feeling like you can choose to act differently and change the outcome. It preserves that sense of responsibility.
Both also have issues with interpretation, but different kinds.
Right. Psychic stuff is symbolic, subjective. That dream about a falling house, what does it really mean? Hugely open to interpretation, bias, error. AI, especially complex models, can be black boxes. We get a prediction, but it's really hard to know why the AI made it. You need specific techniques, explainable AI or XAI, to even try and figure out the reasoning.
So, human interpretation is key for both, but the challenge is different.
Definitely. These aren't interchangeable ways of knowing.
And just having these powerful predictive tools, whether they're psychic or AI based, raises some really profound ethical and maybe even existential questions that the material dives into.
Oh, absolutely. That core tension, free will versus predetermination. If we get really good at predicting things, how does knowing what's probably going to happen affect our feeling that we can choose otherwise? Does it subtly push us onto the predicted path?
The material suggests the more precise the prediction, the stronger that psychological push might be.
Yeah. And then there's the whole dynamic of self-fulfilling and self-averting prophecies. This is huge.
Predictions aren't neutral.
Not at all. They are active forces, as the material puts it. An AI predicting a bank run could spark the panic that causes it. That's self-fulfilling.
But a psychic warning about an accident could make someone change plans and avoid it. That's self-averting.
Exactly. So, this predictive power is inherently a double edged sword. It can guide us or it can manipulate us, sometimes unintentionally.
And then there's the issue of who control these tools. The power of knowledge and control.
A major concern highlighted. Think about the potential for misuse. Governments predicting dissent to suppress it, companies using predictions to exploit consumers more effectively, gaining military advantages.
It raises the stakes significantly.
Immensely. The material really stresses the need for governance, transparency, accountability, trying to prevent really dystopian scenarios where algorithms essentially control people's lives.
There's also a risk mentioned about AI predictions reinforcing existing problems,
Yeah.
amplifying collective bias.
Yeah, that's a critical point. AI learns from the data we give it. If that data reflects existing societal biases, like in historical crime data or loan applications or hiring practices, the AI will learn those biases. And if its predictions, based on those biases, are then used to make decisions, like deploying police or approving loans, it can create feedback loops that actually worsen the original inequality, a self fulfilling cycle of bias.
So, developing ethical AI, ones that try to mitigate bias, is essential.
Absolutely crucial, according to the sources.
And finally, there's just the sheer weight of knowing, the responsibility of foresight.
It's not just about getting the prediction right. The material argues it's about understanding the impact of having and sharing that knowledge. It suggests we need wisdom and empathy, using foresight not just to passively see what might happen, but maybe to actively steer towards better futures.
Okay, so let's pull back a bit. We've journeyed through this deep dive, looking at these two really different ways humans try to glimpse what's ahead. From ancient intuition, psychic feelings, to hyper-modern algorithms crunching data.
Right. Both psychic precognition and AI analytics offer these unique, powerful, though often probabilistic views of future possibilities. They draw on totally different inputs, use different mechanisms.
We saw how the material suggests some intriguing overlaps, maybe both reflecting some deeper probability landscape, but also highlights the really crucial differences in how they work and what they imply.
Yeah, and the takeaway isn't just about comparing them.
No, it seems the material really leaves us with this idea that the future isn't just something passively waiting to be predicted. It's something we're actively co-creating, partly through how we understand and react to these predictions themselves, whether they come from intuition or from data.
Which brings us to a final thought, really, a question for you, the listener, to mull over, drawing right from the core of this material. Given that both our intuition and our data analysis can give us hints about what might be coming, and knowing that the predictions themselves can actually change the outcome, how does this growing power to foresee probable futures change our responsibility right here, right now, in the present?